I went camping alone on a trail I'd hiked dozens of times before. The woods were quiet, empty, until a man came sprinting past me at full speed, not running from me, but towards something. 30 seconds later, he stopped, turned around, and stared directly at me. That was the moment I realized I wasn't alone out there. This happened just last fall. I live close to a lot of hiking trails and camping areas, so spontaneous trips were normal for me. I didn't always plan ahead. Sometimes I'd just find a trail, pack a bag, and head out the next morning. That trip was supposed to be one of those. When I pulled into the trailhead parking lot about an hour from my town, it was completely empty. No cars, no voices, nothing. I locked my car, threw my backpack on, and started hiking. The woods were calm, the kind of quiet that usually clears your head. I was walking with my eyes on the trail when I heard something ahead of me. Footsteps, fast ones, branches snapping, gravel crunching. I looked up and saw movement deeper down the trail. A man was coming toward me, quickly, and as he got closer, my stomach tightened. He wasn't jogging, he was sprinting, full speed. I stepped off the trail to give him room. He flew past me without slowing down, and when I looked at his face, something felt deeply wrong. He didn't look scared. He looked vacant, like he wasn't thinking at all. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, almost like he didn't even register that I was there. I watched him disappear down the trail and waited a few seconds before stepping back onto it. But about half a minute later, I felt the urge to look back. That's when my stomach dropped. He had stopped. He was standing still, far down the trail, staring straight at me. I immediately turned forward and kept walking, heart pounding. 30 seconds later, I looked again. He was gone. Not on the trail, not in the woods, just gone. I told myself the safest option was to keep going. Turning back meant heading toward him, assuming he hadn't just vanished into the trees. Still, the thought crept in. What if he hadn't been running randomly? What if he was running away from something? And what if I was walking straight toward it? I reached my campsite before sunset. It wasn't marked, just a clearing in the trees. No fire rings, no landmarks. Normally, forest sounds relax me. That night, the silence felt wrong, too quiet. As darkness fell, I built a small fire, more for comfort than warmth. But when night fully settled in, even the fire started to feel like a mistake, like a beacon. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, running, far away, maybe 100 yards out, but unmistakably human. They stopped abruptly. Silence again. I panicked and smothered the fire, plunging everything into darkness. I stood frozen, listening. Then it happened again. Running footsteps. This time closer, much closer. They stopped suddenly, right in front of me. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a figure standing half hidden behind a tree, watching me. Not moving, not speaking, just observing. It didn't feel human. I couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. And that terrified me more than anything. After what felt like forever, the figure slowly stepped backward, silently, and vanished into the trees. No footsteps, nothing. I waited. 30 minutes passed before I dared move. I packed my gear with shaking hands, turned on my weak flashlight, and started down the trail. I never heard footsteps again, but the silence followed me the entire way. When I reached my car, I got in and drove away without stopping. The next day, I noticed deep scratches along my car door. The passenger handle was broken, ripped so hard the latch snapped. Someone had tried to get in. To this day, I don't know if it was the man on the trail, or whatever had been watching me in the woods. All I know is this: I don't camp alone anymore, and I never will. Next story. I didn't realize I was being followed until the man standing in the woods said my name. Not shouted it, not whispered it. He said it like we were old friends. That's when I understood that the footsteps I'd heard at night, the light I saw on the trail, and the strange feeling that I was never really alone were all connected. I was backpacking alone through a state forest on a long, regulated trail that required reserved campsites. The full trail stretched close to 80 miles, and because of its length, ranger presence was rare. The campsite system existed mostly for bear safety, environmental protection, and to keep track of how many people were in the forest at any given time. I did everything right. I reserved 2 campsites in advance, one at the 12-mile mark and another at mile 26. Each campsite was isolated, spaced roughly a mile apart from the next. I wasn't expecting company. The hike to the first site was long but uneventful. I arrived around midday, rested through the afternoon, and realized I hadn't seen a single other hiker all day. It was off-season, so I didn't think much of it. That night, I slept well. I only woke once, sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning, to what sounded like footsteps on the trail. I remember thinking it was odd for someone to be hiking that late, but I fell back asleep almost immediately. The next morning, I packed up early, had breakfast and coffee, and continued deeper into the forest. The second hike was longer, steeper, and more remote. I didn't reach the next campsite until late in the evening. Still, I hadn't seen anyone. By the time I set up my tent and started a small fire, the forest was dark. The silence felt heavier than the night before. Not peaceful, just empty. I tried to enjoy it. Several hours passed. It was around 9 or 10 at night when I heard footsteps again, this time far down the trail I'd come from. When I turned, I saw a light, a headlamp. It was moving slowly between the trees, getting closer to my campsite. I immediately thought about the footsteps I'd heard the night before. If it was the same person, I should have passed them during the day, but I hadn't seen anyone. The light kept approaching, and then suddenly stopped. For a moment, it looked like it was pointed directly at me, or my campfire. Then it turned off the trail and moved into the forest. About 20 seconds later, the light shut off completely. No footsteps, no movement. It felt deliberate, like whoever it was didn't want to be seen once they realized I could see them. I watched that spot for at least 15 minutes. Nothing happened. Eventually, I convinced myself they must have set up an unofficial campsite nearby and gone to sleep. It was the only explanation that made sense. An hour passed. I wasn't tired. My body felt alert, almost tense, like it didn't want me to sleep. And I'm glad I listened to it, because then I heard something behind me, a soft crunch of leaves, close, too close. I jumped up and turned, but couldn't see anything. The sound stopped instantly. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the woods. Standing about 10 yards away was a man. He wasn't dressed like a hiker. He had no backpack, no gear. And when the light hit him, he didn't move, like he was hoping I still couldn't see him. I yelled, asking what he was doing. He hesitated, then started walking toward me. He smiled, and that's when I realized I recognized him. Not someone I knew, just someone I'd seen before, in passing, somewhere ordinary. Then he said my name, casually, friendly. I knew I had never spoken to this man, never introduced myself, never given him my name, and suddenly everything clicked. He hadn't followed the trail. He'd followed me, from before the hike, from somewhere back home. He'd stayed just far enough behind during the day for me not to notice, and moved at night when he thought I was asleep. That's why he wasn't dressed like a backpacker. When I stepped back and grabbed my bag, his smile vanished. He asked what I was doing, his voice flat now. I didn't answer. I turned toward the trail. He shouted my name, aggressively, and his footsteps sped up. I ran. I kept my light off and moved as fast as I could. He followed for maybe 15 seconds but didn't chase far. I walked through the entire night, using my satellite phone to contact authorities until I reached a ranger near my first campsite. They never found him. No car, no reservation, no trace. For him to leave that forest unseen, he would have had to travel miles off trail with almost no gear. Something even experienced backpackers struggle to survive, but I still don't know who he was. And sometimes, I wonder if the times I thought I'd seen him before weren't coincidences at all. And if I'm being honest, there's a part of me that hopes he never made it out of that forest. Next story. I thought renting a camper van would be the safe way to experience the wilderness. I didn't want to be completely exposed. Didn't want to be trapped in a tent with nothing but fabric between me and the dark. I wanted walls, a lock, an engine I could start if something went wrong. But that night, deep in the forest, I realized something terrifying. Whatever was out there didn't care about locks, and it didn't need a tent. A few years ago, I was in between jobs and had a lot of free time on my hands. Instead of flying somewhere expensive for a short vacation, I decided to rent a camper van and take a long trip. 3 or 4 weeks, moving slowly, camping along the way. I wasn't a city person. I loved nature, and this felt like the perfect way to explore it without throwing myself completely into the deep end. Sleeping in a van felt safer than sleeping in a tent, a solid metal box with the ability to drive away if I needed to. So I headed north, toward national forests and public lands where free camping was allowed. The first couple of nights, I stayed at truck stops just to sleep and keep moving. I think I was trying too hard to make my first real campsite something special, some hidden, beautiful place in the wilderness, instead of easing into it at a normal campground. By the third day, I finally found myself on a long, desolate road surrounded by public land in every direction. I was using an app that showed dispersed campsites other people had used before. I had several marked, but none of them were there. Every time I reached a spot, there was nothing. No trail, no clearing, no signs of campers. I drove for over an hour down a rough, unpaved road, growing more frustrated by the minute. The sun was dropping fast, and I knew once it went down, finding any trail at all would be nearly impossible. I didn't have service anymore. Turning back meant driving an hour just to maybe find another site that also might not exist. Then I saw it, a barely visible path branching off the road. It was past every campsite I'd marked, but it was the first actual trail I'd seen. It was narrow, rugged, and led straight into the trees, but the van could fit. I backed up and turned onto it. The trail went on for about 5 minutes before ending abruptly in a single clearing, just big enough for the van. No other paths, no neighboring sites, completely alone. I sat there in the driver's seat, staring into the woods, and felt this heavy dread settle into my chest. My gut was screaming at me to leave. Something felt wrong about the place. Normally, I would have listened, but I was tired, frustrated, and convinced my nerves were just reacting to being so far outside my comfort zone. I shut the engine off and climbed into the back of the van. It was already dark. I lay down to relax, and then I heard footsteps outside, crunching gravel. Before I could even react, there was a loud knock on the driver's side window. My first thought was relief. Another camper, someone else nearby. I walked up front and saw a man standing by the door, peering inside. He gave a quick, awkward smile and introduced himself as Mike. Said he was just stopping by to say hello to his neighbor before it got too dark. That didn't make sense. It was already dark, and I had no idea where he could have come from. He was twitchy, shifting his weight. His eyes kept darting past me, toward the back of the van, like he was waiting for someone else to appear. I thanked him and tried to end the conversation. As I stepped away, I noticed something unsettling. He didn't move. He stood there, watching me walk into the back of the van. After a few seconds, I peeked through the curtain. He was gone. No footsteps, no flashlight, no sign of where he'd gone. I searched every window, expecting to see a lantern or headlights, something, but the woods were completely dark, silent, empty. That's when I knew I had to leave, but I needed to understand where he went. I stepped outside. The forest felt oppressive, like it was closing in. My instincts were screaming at me to get back inside. Then I heard movement behind me, a soft shuffle. I moved around the van, then slowly knelt down and looked underneath it, and I saw his eyes, staring back at me from the darkness. I ran. The man burst out from under the van, screaming and slamming into the door as I jumped inside. His face was twisted, wild, violent, almost animalistic. He beat on the window with everything he had. I started the engine and drove. He chased the van, grabbed at it, tried to climb on. Several times he caught up as I fought through the rough trail. I thought I was going to get stuck, thought the van would fail. But eventually, I reached the main road. I drove for 2 hours straight to the nearest town. I didn't sleep at all that night. And I know, without a doubt, that if I had stayed, or if he had gotten inside, I would never have left that forest.